Good morning. Fill me up, O God, until my cup overflows. Thank you for joining me. I'm Minister Thomas McBride, and today is March 13th in the year 2024, and I'll be reading you all the daily devotional. And the devotional I read from comes from the Glorify app. I highly suggest that you download it. And so you all know, I'm reading this for the first time myself, so we're getting a chance to grow together. Let's start off with our inspirational quote. And today, our inspirational quote comes from Henry Newman. And it reads, "More than any other story in the gospel, the parable of the prodigal son expresses the boundlessness of God's compassionate love." Amen. Today, our Bible passage comes from Luke chapter 15, verses 13 through 24. And the version I'm going to be reading is the New International Version, but I highly suggest that you read the King James. And it reads, "Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living." Verse 14, "After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need." Verse 15, "So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of the country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs." Verse 16, "He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything." Verse 17, "When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death?'" Verse 18, "I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you.'" Verse 19, "I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants." Verse 20, "So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him." Verse 21, "The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.'" Verse 22, "But the father said to his servant, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet.'" Verse 23, "Bring the fatted calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate." Verse 24, "For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So they began to celebrate. Amen. May the Lord add a blessing unto the reading and the hearing of his holy word. The parable of the prodigal son is one of the greatest and most moving stories ever told, inspiring countless works of literary and artistic expressions. In this beautiful story, we see the tune of grace played out through the table of a wayward son, hell-bent on pursuing his own selfish pursuit of pleasure and identity. Kenneth Bailey, an expert in Middle Eastern culture at the time of Jesus, tells us that the son demanded, "Give me my inheritance," as a tantrament to wishing his father dead. Imagine the shock for Jesus' listeners when the father graciously agreed to the request. In turn, the sons disgraced his father's, in turn, the son disgraces his family and burns through his inheritance until he finds himself empty, broke, and alone. As the son, In his final act of desperation, decides to go home and beg his father's forgiveness, Jesus drops another culturally shocking bombshell on his listeners. Seeing his son a long way off, the father picks up his robe and begins to run towards him. A distinguished man, and this time moving slowly, would have been the way that he would have moved. Or he would have directed his servants, or even had things brought to him. He never would have ran. As Jesus' listeners give a sharp intake of breath for a second time, the running father goes towards the son, not to scold, lecture, run him out of town, hold him up as an example, not to shame, but to embrace, to kiss, to rejoice. More than any other story in the gospel, the parable of the prodigal son expresses the boundlessness of God's compassionate love. Grace is a father hiking up his robe and running to a warm embrace. But embrace is not just a hug. It's a kind settlement. It's also a banquet, a robe, and a ring. The full reinstatement of all that I had wasted in my wandering. Take a moment now to picture God as a running father, hurrying in his pursuit of you. Try picturing his arms around you. Allow the grace of his embrace to wipe away your fears, your insecurities, your shame. Listen as he speaks to you. My son, my daughter, I am so glad you're home. Come and enjoy the banquet I am prepared in your honor. Grace is waiting to embrace you today. May you encounter the running Father and the truth that you are truly loved, known, forgiven, and free. Amen. I truly hope that this devotional today lets us all know that, yes, we all are like the parable son, or the prodigal son. We all have done some things to really run away from our Father. And we've gotten into a lot of trouble in the process. But just like the prodigal son, when we come to our senses, we can get up and return home. And when we return, we don't have to be fearful of just being a worker. We hear right here in this devotional that God is waiting to see us in the distance, and when he sees us, he's ready to take flight for us. He's ready to embrace us. He's ready to restore us. Just come home. May God bless and keep you all, is my continued prayer.